Today is such a wicked face. Fighting going on between the human race.
Alright, good morning out there. Happy Valentine's Day. Yes, this video is a day late. I honestly meant to do this yesterday, but yesterday got kind of busy and hectic for me. And I apologize because I really wanted to do this video yesterday, and as you all know, yesterday was a huge, monumental celebration for us metalheads because the debut album by Black Sabbath turned 50 years old, and in my humble opinion, the birth of heavy metal happened 50 years ago too. So yesterday was the birth of heavy metal as we know it. And of course, you know, right here is the album, to me, that started it all. Yes, you know, before that, you know, so where did the roots of heavy metal really come from? You could go all the way back to the 16th and 17th century to an extent with classical music, you know, Beethoven, Bach, Tchaikovsky, you know, and Mozart and composers like that. You know, then you can get into, you know, blues. Yeah, when blues came up with Buddy Guy, you know, and all those guys. B.B. King, you know, Chuck Berry, you know, blues and early 50s rockabilly, I guess you could say, kind of paved the way for metal also. Because heavy metal music is basically classical music and blues based. Put them two together and just turn up the volume and you got heavy metal pretty much, you know. But now going into the 60s too is where, you know, bands started playing a bit louder, you know, and, you know, more guitar distortion became prominent with bands like the Yardbirds, Cream, even the Beatles. I mean, arguably the Beatles wrote the very first heavy metal track, being Helter Skelter, and I could probably agree with that. I mean, even early on too, you know, even though this is probably more along the lines of a punk influence, My Generation by The Who, which came out in 1965. You know, that was a pretty aggressive track for that time. You know, or, you know, anything by the Kinks, you know, early on. You know, with, you know, tracks like You've Really Got Me, which Van Halen would naturally cover. So yeah, you know, the roots of where heavy metal came from definitely go all the way back. And, you know, you get into the psychedelic area, or yeah, the psychedelic era with, you know, Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix. And when Hendrix came along, man, it even took guitar playing to a whole different level at that time because nobody was playing like Jimi Hendrix. You know, prior, you know, I mean, I guess you could say early on maybe Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page were paving the way, and, you know, Ginger Fish, you know, that bass playing on those early Cream albums. But, you know, Hendrix took guitar playing to a whole different level, but it still wasn't full-on heavy metal, you know, as we know it, or would come to know it as. And as, you know, the psychedelic era, you know, moved on, you know, with bands like Pink Floyd, you know, Blue Cheer, yes, Blue Cheer to me was not the first heavy metal band. You know, you had other acts too, like The Gods, you know, and plenty of other acts that were doing psychedelic music, King Crimson. I mean, the list goes on and on, which is where we go into those early roots of progressive metal, or progressive rock, or proto-metal, whatever you want to call it, with bands like Uriah Heep, you know, King Crimson, like I just mentioned, you know, Genesis, you know, and a plethora of other bands, Lucifer's Friends, Blood Rock, the mighty Deep Purple. But to me, when you add it all up and you boil it down to who actually invented metal, it was Black Sabbath. And to me, the reason why Black Sabbath invented metal, because their tone was much heavier for the time. The music was much darker. They weren't using Hammond organs, you know. It was like straight up just guitar-based heavy metal, early heavy metal. And Black Sabbath, to me, is the most influential band on the planet. I mean, look at what Black Sabbath has done since their inception when it comes to metal and what they've influenced. Everything you hear going forward comes from a Tony Iommi riff somehow. When you narrow it down, I mean, look at all the doom metal and stoner metal acts out there, you know, that are currently out there. Bands like Lucifer, Saint Vitus, Candlemass, Spiritual Beggars, Electric Wizard, you know, bands like that. Where did it all come from? Pentagram, too, to an extent. Even though I think Pentagram came out around the time Sabbath came out. But you can definitely tell Pentagram was definitely influenced by Sabbath. But where did that all come from? It came from Tony Iommi and Black Sabbath, naturally. Even in, like, thrash metal, yes. Bands like Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, you know, Exodus, Overkill, Creator, Destruction, Sodom. When you really narrow it down, it comes from that symptom of the universe type of riff. You know, when you really think about it, or maybe it tracks like Cornucopia or Under the Sun, you know? When you narrow it down, it all comes from Black Sabbath. The darkness, the heaviness, the stoner vibe, you know? To me, it all came from Sabbath. Even bands like Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. Strangely, yeah, it kind of sounds weird to probably mention grunge, but listen to some Soundgarden, man. They got some strong Black Sabbath influences. Especially on tracks like, you know, Jesus Christ Pose. Jesus Christ Pose. Outshined, you know. What's the other one? Rusty Cage. Yeah, man, you can hear a Sabbath influence. I mean, yeah. Everything, even in black metal, you can hear Black Sabbath influence with the doomy, funeral doom type of stuff. And the depressive, suicidal black metal stuff. Hell, in death metal, the crunch, the dark riffs. It all came from Sabbath. But yeah, man, on this day, I mean, it's a day later now. Today being Friday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, but Friday, February 13th, 50 years ago, is when that debut album by Black Sabbath dropped. And it changed the world. It's an album. When this thing dropped back in 1970 on Friday the 13th, ironically, what a day for it to drop too. This thing scared the hell out of people because of how dark and heavy it was at that time. Opening tracks like Black Sabbath, come on, that slow, doomy riff. You know? Down, 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 down. You know? It all came from this. This album has had such an impact on heavy metal. Black Sabbath in general, not just this album. Anything Sabbath released after this. And we got another album later in the year that turns 50 that also came out in 1970 that was a huge influence. I'm talking about Paranoid, of course, but, you know, yeah, we're focusing on the first Black Sabbath album. Not really a review, just saying happy birthday to this album. And happy birthday to the birth of heavy metal. There's going to be more videos based on this, you know. But anyways, that's it for now. And thank God for Black Sabbath. And thank God for the greatest music on this planet. No matter what genre it is. Heavy fucking metal.